You know how people say the big moments, the ones that really change your life, start small? They never hit you all at once. That was how it was for me. I'd had dinner ready by 6 that night, as I always did on Thursdays. Pasta primavera, Natalie's favorite. She was late, but she texted saying there'd been a last-minute meeting, and she'd be home by 7. Not a big deal. She's in marketing. Late nights happen. I didn't think much of it at the time. When she finally came through the door around 7:30, I noticed something odd right away. It wasn't her usual energy. Natalie's the type of person who fills a room without trying. Warm, chatty, effortlessly charming. But that night, she seemed distant, distracted. She smiled at me, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Long day?" I asked, pulling her plate from the oven to reheat it. She leaned against the counter, tugging at the sleeves of a dark gray jacket I'd never seen before. It was too big on her. Definitely not hers. "Yeah, something like that," she muttered. "I borrowed this jacket from a coworker. It got cold in the office, and I forgot mine." She looked away when she said it, shuffling her feet like she was suddenly aware of how conspicuous the thing was. It hung on her petite frame like a blanket. I stepped closer, reaching out to take it. "Want me to hang it up for you?" Her hand shot out to stop me. "No, it's fine. I'll do it." She laughed a little too hard, a little too forced, and shrugged it off herself. I caught a whiff of something. Cologne, faint but distinct, not her usual perfume. Not mine, either. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "I didn't know your office had a dress code for after hours." It was meant to be a joke, but it landed flat. Her laugh came again, more strained this time. "It's just one of those days," she said, kissing me on the cheek before heading to the bedroom. "I'm going to shower and get out of these work clothes." Something about the way she hurried out of the kitchen set my nerves on edge. I couldn't pinpoint why, but it gnawed at me. Maybe it was the cologne, or how defensive she'd gotten over the jacket. Or maybe it was just the way she avoided eye contact. I stood there for a minute, staring at the empty doorway, the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall. When I followed her to the bedroom a few moments later, the jacket was draped neatly over the back of the chair by the window. It was heavier than it looked, the kind of jacket a man might wear. Sharp lines, tailored. Definitely not hers. My hand brushed the inside pocket as I inspected it, and I paused. There was a card inside. I didn't pull it out, not yet. Instead, I placed the jacket back carefully, like I hadn't touched it. My pulse thudded in my ears. I told myself I was being paranoid. People share jackets all the time, right? Offices can get cold. But the feeling didn't go away. Natalie was in the bathroom when I returned. The sound of the shower starting filtered through the door, and I could see her silhouette moving behind the frosted glass as she undressed. I turned to leave, to give her privacy. But then something stopped me. Through the small crack in the door, I saw her step out of her skirt. And that's when I noticed, she wasn't wearing any underwear. Natalie always wore underwear. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. I wanted to look away, to turn around and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But my eyes stayed locked on her outline. I didn't say anything. Not that night. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed after she fell asleep, staring at the jacket in the corner of the room. My mind raced, every small detail of the evening suddenly magnified, blown out of proportion, and stitched together in ways I didn't want to believe. Could be nothing. It could. But the question, sharp and unrelenting, buried itself deep in my chest. What if it's not? I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my thoughts drifted back to the jacket, to the smell of cologne, to the sight of Natalie slipping out of her skirt, her usual routine disrupted in a way that didn't make sense. I told myself I was imagining things, that this wasn't who she was. We'd been married for 7 years, and sure, things weren't as electric as they used to be, but that's how relationships evolve. You settle into comfort, into familiarity. But that familiarity had been slipping away lately, hadn't it? A string of late nights, more than I could count. Vague reasons, a big client pitch, a team dinner, drinks with coworkers. I'd asked her about it once, casually, and she waved it off. "It's just a busy season," she said, kissing me on the forehead. I let it go. I tried to let it go again. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, the quiet of the house felt suffocating. Natalie was next to me, breathing softly, the shower and the long day pulling her into sleep almost instantly. My chest felt tight. The longer I stared at her, the louder my thoughts became. I don't even know when the idea entered my head, but once it did, it stuck. Her phone was right there on the nightstand, screen down, close enough to reach. I didn't move right away. I stared at it for a long time, battling myself. Don't do this. What if you find something? What if you don't? Do you even want to know? But it wasn't just about wanting to know. I needed to know. The doubt had planted itself in my mind, and it was growing, wrapping around everything. Before I realized it, I'd reached over and grabbed her phone, my hands trembling as I held it in the dim light. Her passcode hadn't changed. She trusted me. That thought hit me harder than I expected. She trusted me. And yet, here I was. I opened her photos first. At first, it was nothing. Pictures of the dog. A couple of selfies she'd taken at work. Screenshots of recipes she'd never made. Normal stuff. I almost put it down, relief bubbling to the surface. Almost. Then I noticed an album at the bottom of the list. It was locked, hidden away behind an extra layer of security. Something about it sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated, my finger hovering over it. I told myself again, asterisk, this is nothing. It's probably nothing, asterisk. But when I opened it, everything fell apart. The first photo stopped me cold. Natalie, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed I didn't recognize, smiling at the camera. She wasn't looking at the lens. She was looking at whoever was behind it. Her smile was soft, intimate. It wasn't the smile she gave me anymore. The second photo was worse. Her hand rested on a man's leg. Dark jeans, muscular build. His face wasn't in the frame, but you could see enough to understand what it meant. Photo after photo told the same story. A picnic blanket spread on the grass, a bottle of wine between them. Her sitting in his lap, her head on his shoulder. The same jacket from earlier draped across her shoulders as he stood beside her, a hand resting possessively on her waist. The final one broke me. A selfie of the two of them, her head tucked under his chin, his arms wrapped around her. She looked so at ease, so happy. There was nothing casual about it. Nothing you could explain away. I put the phone down, my hand trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. My chest felt like it was caving in, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I looked at her, lying there beside me, her hair fanned out across the pillow, her face peaceful. My wife. The woman I'd shared my life with. The woman I thought I knew. The emotions came in waves. First, disbelief. Maybe I'd misinterpreted. Maybe there was an explanation. But no explanation could undo what I'd seen. Then anger, hot and sharp, rising up to drown out everything else. How could she do this to me? To us. But beneath the anger was sadness, deep and crushing. The kind of sadness that leaves you hollow, like everything you've built is gone. I wanted to wake her up, shake her, yell at her, ask her why. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I stood up and walked out of the room, closing the door quietly behind me. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a drink, and stared at the jacket still draped over the chair. It felt like it was mocking me, its cologne-soaked fabric a symbol of everything I didn't want to admit. I downed the drink in one swallow, but it didn't make the pain go away. I needed time to think, to decide what to do. But all I could hear in my mind over and over was the sound of her laughter in those photos, the way she leaned into him like he was her whole world. That was supposed to be me. Part of me wanted to burn it all down, to confront her right away and demand answers. But another part of me, God, the pathetic part of me, wanted to pretend I'd never found the photos. That none of it was real. Because if I confronted her, if I said it out loud, it would mean admitting the truth. I stayed in bed long after I'd put her phone back on the nightstand, my thoughts swirling. Natalie lay next to me, undisturbed, her soft, steady breathing a sharp contrast to the storm inside me. I felt trapped in the bedroom, like the walls were closing in. I couldn't lie there any longer. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and padded into the kitchen, the house dark and still around me. The hardwood floor was cold under my feet as I poured myself a drink, staring out the window at nothing in particular. I tried to make sense of what I'd seen, to figure out what to say when the moment came. But no matter how I turned it over in my head, it all came back to the same thing. The photos, her betrayal, her laughter with someone who wasn't me. The glass in my hand shook slightly as I set it on the counter. I didn't know how to do this, how to confront her. Part of me wanted to scream and demand answers, but another part of me, God, the pathetic part, wanted to go back to bed and pretend I didn't know anything. But I couldn't do that. Not anymore. I took a deep breath and put the glass down. My body felt like it was moving on autopilot as I turned and headed back toward the bedroom. The faint sound of her breathing filled the space, and for a moment I paused in the doorway, gripping the frame for support. She looked so peaceful, so unbothered. How could she sleep so easily when everything was falling apart? I stepped into the room, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Natalie," I said softly. She didn't stir. "Natalie," I said again, louder this time. Her eyes fluttered open, her face creasing with confusion as she glanced at the clock. "Mike, what are you doing? It's the middle of the night." I stood over her, my chest heaving. "Get up. We need to talk." "What?" She sat up slightly, rubbing her eyes. "Mike, what's going on?" I swallowed hard, my hands trembling. "Who is he?" Her brows furrowed, and she blinked at me, confused. "Who is who? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Natalie. I saw the photos. On your phone." That got her attention. She froze, her hand still mid-motion. For a moment, she just stared at me, her mouth slightly open, like she was scrambling for an excuse. Then she shook her head. "I can't believe you went through my phone," she said, her voice sharp. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on me," I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. "You've been cheating on me, and you're mad because I found out?" Her face hardened, the confusion replaced by something colder. "I wasn't cheating on you. Stop lying," I shouted. "I saw the pictures, Natalie. The hotel, the picnics, the way you looked at him. How could you do this to me?" For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Fine," she said flatly. "Yes. I've been seeing someone. Are you happy now?" Her words hit me like a slap, but the way she said them, calm, indifferent, cut even deeper. "How long?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged, her face emotionless. "A few weeks. A few weeks." I repeated, the words catching in my throat. "You've been lying to me for weeks, and you just, what? Act like it's no big deal." She rolled her eyes, pulling the blanket tighter around her. "Mike, stop being so dramatic. It's not like it was serious." I stared at her, disbelief coursing through me. "Not serious? You're in hotel rooms with him, Natalie. You're wearing his jacket, and you're telling me it's not serious." "It's not," she said, her tone flat. "It's just something that happened." Her indifference was like a dagger twisting in my chest. "So what? You didn't think it was worth mentioning? You didn't think I deserved to know?" She shrugged again, her voice colder than ever. "What would have been the point? You don't even notice me anymore, Mike. All you care about is your routine. When was the last time you actually made me feel wanted? Her words were sharp and deliberate, each one cutting deeper than the last. So, this is my fault? I asked, my voice trembling. You're blaming me for this? I'm saying it's not all on me, she said, meeting my gaze with a pointed stare. You barely pay attention to me anymore. A few minutes of effort before bed isn't enough, Mike. I needed more. Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, all I could do was stare at her, my mind reeling. You could have talked to me, I said finally, my voice breaking. You could have told me you were unhappy. She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. And what would that have changed? Nothing. We both know it. This marriage has been dead for a while, Mike. You just didn't want to admit it. I felt the last thread of hope snap, the weight of her words crushing me. You don't even care, do you? Her face was blank, unreadable. I cared. Once. But not anymore. The finality in her tone was the breaking point. I couldn't stay. I couldn't sit there and listen to her tear down everything we'd built. I turned and walked to the closet, grabbing a duffel bag and stuffing it with whatever clothes I could reach. My hands shook as I zipped it shut, but I didn't look back. When I returned to the bedroom, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, her arms crossed. She didn't say anything. I stood in the doorway, my chest heaving, my throat tight. Goodbye, Natalie. She didn't respond. Didn't try to stop me. I walked out the door, the cold night air biting at my skin. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. Whatever we had was gone. And maybe, just maybe, it had been gone for a long time. I didn't go far that night. I ended up at a hotel just outside town, one of those places with a faint smell of bleach and carpets worn thin from years of footsteps. The room was clean, in the way that felt clinical rather than comforting. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, my duffel bag on the floor by my feet. It should have felt like a relief to be out of the house, away from her. But it didn't. All I could think about was her. The way she looked at me, so detached. The cold indifference in her voice when she admitted the affair, like it was just a minor inconvenience she had to explain away. No apology. No regret. I closed my eyes and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. The weight in my chest was unbearable, like a hand squeezing the air out of me. My mind wouldn't stop replaying everything. Our confrontation, the photos, the way she dismissed our marriage like it was already over. Maybe it was already over. I stayed up the entire night, alternating between anger, grief, and moments of clarity that were almost worse than the emotions. I kept asking myself the same question. What do I do now? By morning, the answer was clear. I went back to the house the next afternoon. I didn't want to, but I didn't have a choice. My suit for work was still hanging in the closet, my laptop charger on the desk. Natalie's car was in the driveway when I pulled up, and for a second, I considered turning around and leaving. But no, I couldn't avoid this forever. I stepped inside, and the smell of coffee hit me immediately. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open, a half-empty mug next to her. She looked up when she heard the door and watched me, her expression unreadable. "You're back," she said after a moment, her tone flat. "Just to grab some things," I replied, heading straight for the bedroom. I didn't want to linger. As I moved around the room, shoving clothes into my bag and grabbing whatever essentials I could think of, I kept expecting her to come in, to say something. But she didn't. She stayed in the kitchen, the faint sound of her typing drifting down the hall. When I returned to the living room with my duffel bag, she was standing by the counter, her arms crossed. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice calm, almost bored. I set the bag down and looked at her. "I'm filing for divorce." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. Her expression didn't change. "Okay," she said simply. That one word hit me harder than anything she could have said. No fight. No attempt to stop me. Just, okay. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. That's it? That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say, Mike? She replied, her voice sharp. You've already made up your mind. Why drag it out? Because this is our marriage, Natalie. I shouted, my voice cracking. 7 years, and you're acting like it's nothing. She rolled her eyes and turned away, grabbing her mug from the counter. You're the one walking away. No, you walked away, I snapped. The second you decided to sleep with someone else, you walked away. She didn't respond. Instead, she leaned against the sink, sipping her coffee like we were discussing the weather. I stood there, staring at her, waiting for something. Anger, tears, regret. Anything. But there was nothing. Just that same cold detachment. It broke something in me. Later, back at the hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed with the divorce forms spread out in front of me. I'd picked them up on the way back, not trusting myself to delay this any longer. The pen in my hand felt heavy, my fingers trembling as I hovered over the line where my name was supposed to go. My mind wandered. Memories came flooding back, uninvited and cruel. Our wedding day, her laugh as we danced, the way she'd looked at me like I was the only man in the world. The time we stayed up all night painting the nursery, even though we never ended up having kids. Lazy Sundays on the couch, her feet in my lap, a blanket draped over both of us. I wasn't innocent in all of this. I could see that now, sitting there in that hotel room, staring at the broken pieces of our life. But what she'd done, what she chose to do, there was no coming back from that. With a deep breath, I signed my name. The next few days were a blur. I called a lawyer, explained the situation as clinically as I could manage. I moved some of my things into storage and found a small apartment on the other side of town. It was nothing special, 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, but it was mine. Waves of grief and anger hit me in turns as I packed up the rest of my life. Every box I filled was a reminder of what I'd lost. The photo albums, the anniversary cards, the little trinkets we'd collected on vacations. I left most of it behind. I didn't want the memories. Natalie didn't fight me on anything. She signed the papers without hesitation, her indifference like a knife twisting in my chest. It was as if she couldn't wait to be rid of me, rid of us. But as painful as it was, there was a strange kind of relief in the finality of it all. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what came next, or how long it would take to rebuild. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living in a life built on broken trust and hollow promises. It was time to start over. The first morning in my new apartment felt surreal. I woke up on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and a pile of laundry I'd dumped in the corner the night before. The place was small, quieter than I was used to, and the walls were bare. There were no familiar smells, no scent of her coffee brewing in the morning, no traces of her lavender lotion on the sheets. At first, the quiet felt suffocating, like the silence was mocking me. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized that for the first time in months, there was no tension. No pit in my stomach, no waiting for her to come home late or wondering who she'd been texting. It was just me. The first few weeks after the divorce were the hardest. Everything felt raw, like I was walking around with an open wound no one could see. I'd find myself replaying the fight in my head, dissecting every word she said. The way she shrugged off our life together, the way she blamed me for what she did. I hated her for it. But then, in quieter moments, I'd find myself looking inward. I couldn't deny that there were cracks in our marriage long before the affair. I hadn't been the husband I wanted to be, the one she probably needed. Somewhere along the way, we'd both stopped trying. She chose to betray me, yes, but I couldn't ignore the part one played in letting us drift apart. I went back and forth between anger and guilt, sadness and relief. I felt like a pendulum, swinging wildly between emotions, trying to find my balance again. There were reminders of her everywhere. A song on the radio, a couple holding hands at the park, even little things like the way my keys felt too light without the key to the house we'd shared. Some days, I thought I was fine, strong, even, but grief has a way of creeping up on you when you least expect it. I got through it by focusing on small things. I set up the apartment, piece by piece, giving myself a sense of ownership over this new space. I bought a cheap coffee maker, some thrift store dishes, and a couple of plants to sit by the window. I started cooking again, not just throwing things together but really cooking, taking my time to try new recipes. It gave me something to focus on, something to look forward to. Work was a welcome distraction. I poured myself into my job during the day, taking on extra projects to keep my mind occupied. But the evenings were harder. That was when the loneliness crept in, when the reality of being alone felt the heaviest. On those nights, I'd go for long walks around the neighborhood, letting the cold air clear my head. I didn't bring my phone or earbuds, just me and the quiet streets. I'd think about the life I'd had and the life I was building now, trying to make sense of it all. It wasn't until one of those walks that I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I'd stopped at a small park a few blocks from my apartment, sitting on a bench under the glow of a street lamp. A father and his son were playing on the swings nearby, the boys' laughter echoing in the crisp night air. It reminded me of a simpler time, of the dreams I used to have about being a dad, about building a family. Natalie and I had talked about kids once, early in our marriage. But as the years went on, those conversations faded into the background, replaced by work and responsibilities and excuses. Now, watching that boy laugh as his dad pushed him higher and higher, I realized that dream wasn't gone. It was just delayed. I wasn't done yet. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this break me. Natalie's betrayal hurt, and it left scars I'd carry for the rest of my life. But those scars weren't going to define me. I wasn't going to let her actions dictate my future. I started small. I signed up for a gym membership, not because I wanted to punish myself, but because I needed to take care of my body again. I reached out to old friends I hadn't seen in years, people I'd lost touch with while I was buried in my marriage. I even signed up for a cooking class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. Each little step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The divorce finalized quickly, with Natalie showing no resistance. She stayed in the house, though it didn't feel like a house worth fighting for anymore. I didn't want it. Too many memories, too many ghosts. She had to pay me compensation for the part of the house that belonged to me. We didn't talk much after that. She sent a short text to let me know the papers had gone through, and I replied with a simple thanks. That was it. 7 years of marriage reduced to a couple of words on a screen. It hurt, but it also freed me. Months passed, and slowly, life started to feel normal again, or maybe a new kind of normal. The ache in my chest didn't go away overnight, but it dulled with time. I stopped replaying our fight in my head. Stopped wondering where I'd gone wrong or what I could have done differently. Instead, I started to focus on the future. I thought about the kind of person I wanted to be, the kind of life I wanted to build. I knew I wasn't ready for anything serious, but I also knew that one day, I wanted to try again, to find someone who would love me the way I deserved to be loved. The turning point came one quiet Sunday morning. I was sitting on my tiny balcony, a mug of coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over the city. The light painted everything in shades of gold and orange, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The betrayal would always be a part of my story, a chapter one couldn't erase. But it wasn't the end. It was the start of something new. That morning, as the sun warmed my face, I made a promise to myself. I would build a life worth living. One full of honesty, resilience, and hope. And this time, I wouldn't settle for anything less.